And now we have heard three outstanding female international leaders. We are out of schedule, so this panel discussion must be rather limited in time. But I want to put some follow-up questions to you. First, to Mairead Maguire. Together with Betty Williams, you started in 1976 this grassroots movement, peace movement for non-violent change in Northern Ireland. And finally, we got the peace, signed by political leaders. What do you think? Will this peace last?
Yes, I do believe it will last, because when the Troubles broke out in Northern Ireland, there were a lot of civil and human rights not acknowledged and given to the minority community. So the civil rights movement were asking for many basic civil rights. Now, had we had real political leadership in that time, we could have really saved ourselves almost 40 years of violent conflict, but we didn't have real political leadership, courageous, imaginative political leadership. So we went into a great deal of violence. Well, since that, a lot of those issues are being dealt with. And when we got our peace agreement, the violence had stopped, thank God. And now we knew when we got a peace agreement, it was an agreement divided amongst different ethnic groups, a power-sharing agreement divided with very little women representation. It was not the best that we would have wanted, but in order to move forward, we accepted it, and now we continue to build the peace. And we'll have to, for generation, really build the peace amongst the people, building trust, building friendship, building democracy from the ground up, because democracy is part of the people. It's people building democracy, not sitting back and saying, we've elected these politicians, now all will be well. So that is what we're trying to do now in Northern Ireland. But we did prove that communities coming out, mobilising, believing in peace, that peace is possible.
Thank you. I think we should congratulate Mairead with the peace agreement of Northern Ireland. It must be great to see that your dream came through.
Well, many people worked for a long, long time on it. Many, many people. It takes a lot of people. It's a multifaceted approach to peacemaking and believing in it and working together. So many people believed in it. And the people of Norway, their help was absolutely so important in helping us on the ground as a community to believe in peace and to work for peace. So that partnership from people outside is very important in peace processes.
And Liz Bernstein, from the Noble Women Initiative, I understand that this is an organization that serves also as a network between the female Nobel laureates. And can you elaborate a little bit about how it is to work with these female Nobel laureates around the world? Among them, Mairead.
Yes, sure. Well, we began in 2004 when we met in Nairobi, Kenya, actually. Jody Williams and I were going for a meeting on landmines, and there we met Wangari Maathai, who had just been awarded the Peace Prize that year, and Shirin Ebadi, who had won the year before, and she had approached us to discuss the issue of landmines in Iran from the Iran-Iraq War. And we met there in Nairobi, and it was actually Shirin who said, we now have women in almost every continent who have won the Nobel Prize. As you pointed out earlier, as Scott pointed out earlier, there had only been 12 at the time in the 100-year history of the prize. But they discussed there the idea of using the credibility and access that the prize affords to support women's rights and peace activists around the world. So went away and decided, how can we put this together? So Jody went off and spoke with Mairead and Betty and Rigoberta Menchú-Tum, and they decided to do so, to work together. And so fortunately, they hired me to help them get this going. And we began in 2006. And yes, each one of them, as you know, is incredibly accomplished and busy in their own right with their own projects, but really decided that the power really, from their own work, as Mairead said through her work in Ireland, really was the power of working together. And yes, the individuals, but the collective action for social change was so important. So they wanted to support other women and men working together for change around the world and to do so together. So some of the examples, Mairead has talked about her experience in Palestine, for example. So she encouraged us to see what we could do collectively to help support women and men in Palestine and Israel working on issues there, and helped us plan a delegation of bringing prominent women to Palestine and to meet people on the ground doing the work, and then to help share their stories and their solutions, which are so seldomly told. So that's just an example of what we do together.
That's very interesting. Having met several of these female Nobel laureates, we know that in many ways they're very different, but they have a common vision. To contribute to peace, and therefore they all deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. But the good thing is that almost all of them didn't stop when they received the Nobel Peace Prize, but they continued their engagement for peace. And that's of great value. Janet, you are especially working with international law. And as I said this morning in my welcome greeting, law has no value in itself, but the purpose is to serve individual peoples. So what will you say? Is international law in that regard more relevant for people's living conditions today than it was?
Oh, absolutely. And the law doesn't grow all by itself like a plant. We have to push it. And when laws haven't been enforced, that means I can get in there and say what they really mean. Of course, CEDAW means half women judges. But laws have been important. I think if you look at the laws against slavery, this anti-slavery movement, that was really the first human rights movement. And that really became a global norm. And we are seeing that dictators are getting afraid of being brought to the International Criminal Court. I think, for the first 20 years of the Convention on Women being ratified, nothing happened with it. And now we're using it in courts. It's overturned local laws in over 400 court cases around the world. So we're really seeing it as a tool. And that's why I want women to get into the constitutions in new countries, all these kinds of little hidden corridors of power, like you can go right to the constitutional court with something, even if they're not used right away. And this has worked. I worked with the Iraqi women and the Kurdish women who were raped by Saddam's army, and we got rape as considered genocide from chemical elite under international law. The judges that we worked with the women leaders trying the Saddam-era trials, used the international definition of rape for the first time. They gave more privacy to women testifying about rape than they had in the tribunal in Rwanda, and we got reparations for the Kurdish women rape victims who all wanted to testify. That's a story no one hears. The first use of international law for women in the Mideast.
Okay, but especially the UN Resolution 1325, which we already have talked about today. Does this resolution really help protecting and empowering women?
No.
Why?
Well, it's provided a lot of people jobs, and countries talk about it a lot. There's a lot of conferences. I used to go to them because 1325 is historic. It's great that we have a norm, but we don't enforce it. 1325 says all countries must comply and see that women get equal rights under international humanitarian law. And then they chip that away. I gave an example about, they're supposed to go to the ICC if they rape women. Is Burma at the ICC? No. Does it rape women? Yes. There's supposed to be absolutely no amnesties. There's amnesties in Burma's constitution. Do they not accept the constitution? No. So I think what we have to do is these have to be really legally binding tools. these resolutions that pass unanimously are considered soft law. I consider them hard law for real rights. But it's going to take a long time to get that way. And meanwhile, I think a lot of the industry that's built up around Security Council resolutions is pushing things for women as policy that they're entitled to as law. So I think it's critical that they're there. They're part of my cottage industry too. I always stand up and say 1325. In fact, I argued to the Iraqi judges that 1325 meant they had to use CEDAW in their judgments, and they did. So, I mean, we've gotten it mentioned by courts sometimes, but that's what has to be done.
Okay. I have to end. Yes, please give her a hand. We have to end up soon now, but Mairead, you started the grassroots movement. The peace agreement was signed by political leaders in Great Britain. How do you see that collaboration or synergy or relations between grassroots and leaders?
Well, I think we all have to work, blossom where you're planted, and we all have different gifts. And as long as we're active in trying to bring about real change, that's what's important. And that's what happened in Northern Ireland. It was when the huge majority of people marched on the streets. In 6 months, there was a 70% decrease in the rate of violence. So we made room for the politicians to move. We organised platforms throughout Northern Ireland, and we invited on spokespeople from the different paramilitary groups, and we listened to what they had to say. We were for all-inclusive dialogue and trying to get everybody on board a peace process. But peacemaking takes time, and there are many setbacks, and we had those. So we would have wanted our peace process and our agreement to come sooner, but there were different blocks that happened along the way. But we did get there, and we got there by cooperation with everyone and working to bring everyone on board and making room for the politicians to move us forward into the peace process. And a lot of people were very courageous in doing that. John Human, people like that. So it was an all-inclusive, unconditional approach to trying to solve what was a deep ethnic political problem, and which was being made worse by militarism, paramilitarism and abuse of laws. So our little model, I think, applies for everywhere, because people are the same everywhere. You have to approach it on a multifaceted way.
Thank you to Mairead, and we admire all three of you. We admire the Nobel laureates and one of your Nobel laureate colleague, Aung San Suu Kyi. We heard her greeting on the screen. She would like to be here, but we know her situation. That's not possible. But we look forward to her visit in Norway, probably this year already. And then we would like to see the Nobel laureate colleagues being with her on the scene here. So welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.